she was sold for being crippled. But the man from the mountain saw something no one else saw. Emily Parker felt the sun burning her skin as she stood in the center of the town square. Her hands gripped the crutches so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her father's voice echoed loudly, repeating to anyone passing by that she was available for domestic work, for a price that made people laugh scornfully. It was when her father started shouting the price that she wanted to disappear. $50 a month, food included, no days off. Her left leg hung uselessly, the result of a childhood illness that no one had properly treated. "She's slow, but she gets the work done," said Frank, her father, while pulling her arm forward as if displaying a defective product. "She cooks, washes, irons. She just can't carry heavy things, but for someone who doesn't want to pay a real salary, she'll do." Nancy, her mother, stood a few steps behind, looking at the ground, not out of shame for what they were doing, but because she didn't want to face the neighbors' pitying looks. Amber, Emily's younger sister, rolled her eyes whenever someone asked if the family had no other solution. "We've tried everything," the 16-year-old girl replied. "She can't get a job in a store, she can't work in the fields, she's not even fit for marriage. What were we supposed to do? Keep supporting her forever?" The words cut deeper than any knife. Emily kept her eyes fixed on the uneven stone pavement of the town square. Every person who passed by and made a disgusted face was another confirmation of what she already knew. She had no value whatsoever. An elderly woman with grey hair stopped in front of her, examined her from head to toe, and shook her head negatively. "With that leg, how is she going to climb stairs to clean?" she asked Frank directly. "She'll manage, Mrs. Margaret," he replied quickly. "She's hard-working, I swear to God." The woman left without another word. 3 other people approached during the morning, asked questions, laughed at the low price, and moved on. None made an offer, not even for the miserable $50 her father was asking for. The sun was already high when Emily noticed a man watching from afar. He was leaning against the wall of St. Mary's Church, on the other side of the town square, with a straw hat covering part of his face. He was tall, had broad shoulders, and wore simple work clothes. He didn't approach for hours, just watched. "No one's going to want her," said Amber, now sitting on the curb. "We should have brought Emily earlier, when she was still 17. Now, at 22, who's going to want an old cripple?" Emily swallowed her tears. She wouldn't give her sister that satisfaction. She had already cried all the tears she was entitled to during the last few weeks, ever since her father announced he was going to do this. The family owed money at the grocery store, the pharmacy, to the owner of the house where they lived. The solution they found was to get rid of the dead weight. "If you weren't crippled, you could work at the Riverside Textiles factory that opened in Springfield," commented Nancy, breaking the silence. "But with that leg, you can't even stand for very long." "I can stand as long as needed," Emily replied softly, but no one paid attention. The man from across the town square finally moved. He walked slowly to where they were, with firm, determined steps. Up close, Emily could see that he must have been in his early 30s, had sunburned skin and light eyes that contrasted with his tanned face. "How much?" he asked, straight to the point, looking at Frank. Emily's father, surprised by the approach, stammered a bit before answering. $50 a month, sir. She works well. She just has this limitation with her leg, but 100, the man cut in. $100 a month, and I'll take her now." Frank's eyes widened. Nancy looked up for the first time in hours. Amber stopped fiddling with her phone to eye the stranger suspiciously. $100, her father repeated, as if he hadn't understood. "Are you sure, sir?" "I am. But I need you to sign a paper saying she'll work for me for at least a year. I don't want trouble later." Emily watched everything, as if seeing a movie scene. This couldn't really be happening. Who was this man? Why was he paying double for someone nobody wanted? Of course. Mr. Frank was already agreeing to everything, eager to close the deal before the man changed his mind. "We'll sign whatever's needed. She's a hard worker, you'll see." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The man pulled a worn wallet from his pocket and counted 10 $10 bills into Mr. Frank's hand. Then he took out a folded sheet of paper and a pen, handing them to Emily's father to sign. The document was simple, handwritten, stating that Emily Parker agreed to work for Michael Sullivan for a period of 12 months in exchange for housing, food, and the agreed payment. "Can she read?" Michael asked, looking directly at Emily for the first time. "I can," she replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "I finished high school." He nodded and waited while Mr. Frank hastily signed the paper, as if afraid it might all disappear at any moment. Nancy signed too, without really reading what was written. Amber was too busy counting the money her father had already handed her to keep safe. "You can get your things," Michael said to Emily, his calm voice clashing with the tension of the moment. "I don't have many things," she answered. "Then let's go." Emily looked at her parents one last time. She hoped to see some sign of regret, a word of farewell, or even an apology. But Mr. Frank was already talking with Nancy about how they would use the money, and Amber was typing something on her phone, smiling. No one looked at her as she started to walk away, leaning on her crutches. Michael walked to an old cart pulled by a brown horse, tied in the shade of a nearby tree. He helped Emily up without a word, took a thick fabric blanket from the seat and laid it over her shoulders. The gesture was so unexpected she was left speechless. "It'll get cold when we start climbing," he explained, climbing onto the driver's seat and taking the reins. "Climbing?" Emily asked, confused. "I live in the mountains. It's a 3-hour ride." The cart began to move, the sound of the horse's hooves echoing on the street stones. Emily looked back one last time and saw the town square growing smaller, along with the family that had given up on her. A strange feeling filled her chest, a mix of relief and fear of the unknown. Michael said nothing during the first hour of the journey. The dirt road soon gave way to a narrower trail climbing up the mountain. Dense trees appeared on both sides, blocking part of the sun. The air grew cooler, as he had predicted. "Why did you buy me?" Emily finally asked, unable to bear the silence any longer. "There are plenty of people who work better than I do." Michael took his time to answer. He kept his eyes fixed on the path ahead, guiding the horse carefully over the rougher sections. "I need someone to help with the house," he said at last, "and you seem to need to get out of there." It wasn't a full answer, but it was something. Emily decided not to press further, at least not now. She closed her eyes and tried to enjoy the gentle sway of the cart, letting the exhaustion of the last hours take over. When she woke up, the sun was already setting on the horizon. The wagon had stopped in front of a small wooden house built on the side of a mountain. It had a simple roof, a narrow porch, and a few windows. Surrounding it were a large vegetable garden, a pen with some goats, and chickens pecking freely. "We're here," announced Michael, getting down from the wagon. Emily looked around, trying to process where she was. The view was breathtaking. She could see the valley below, with organized crops like a large green and brown checkerboard. There were no other houses nearby, just the wild nature of the mountains. Michael helped Emily down and picked up the small bundle she had brought with her few clothes. He opened the door to the house and motioned for her to enter. The interior was simple, but clean. There was a small living room with a table, 2 chairs, and an old sofa. The kitchen was in the same space, with a wood-burning stove and some cabinets. There were 2 doors, one to the bathroom and another to what seemed like a bedroom. "You take the bedroom," said Michael, opening the door. "I'll sleep in the living room." Emily entered the room and found a single bed with clean sheets, a small wardrobe, and a window that looked out onto the vegetable garden. It was simple, but it was more than she had expected. "Thank you," she managed to say. "Tomorrow I'll show you what needs to be done. You must be hungry now." Michael prepared a basic dinner: rice, beans, and fried eggs. They ate in silence, and Emily realized she was famished. It had been over a day since she had eaten properly. When they finished, he cleared the plates, washed them quickly, and pointed to the bathroom. "If you want to take a shower, the water heats up fast. Sleep well." Emily locked herself in the bedroom and let the tears fall for the first time since everything had started. But they weren't tears of sadness. It was a cry of confusion, of relief, of fear for what was to come. She lay down on the bed and, despite all the thoughts swirling in her head, fell asleep almost immediately. The first few days in Michael's house were about adjustment. He woke at dawn and went out to tend the garden and the animals. Emily tried to help with what she could, making coffee, washing dishes, tidying the house. He never asked for anything directly, but she observed what needed to be done and did it. On the third day, Emily tried to fetch water from the well about 20 meters from the house. The bucket was too heavy, and she barely managed a few steps before stumbling. The water spilled all over the ground, soaking her clothes. She expected a scolding, the yelling, the insults. But Michael just appeared with a smaller bucket, showed her how to balance the weight on the side of her good leg, and went back to work. This pattern repeated in the following weeks. Every time Emily faced a difficulty because of her leg, Michael came up with a practical solution without making a fuss. When she couldn't sweep properly while leaning on her crutches, he found a small stool for her to sit on while sweeping the areas she could reach. When she had trouble hanging clothes on the high clothesline, he lowered it. A month after arriving in the mountains, Emily was mending a tear in Michael's work pants. She had always been good with a needle and thread, one of the few skills her mother acknowledged. She was so focused that she didn't notice when he came in and stood watching. "You sew well," commented Michael, making her jump slightly in surprise. "I learned from my grandmother," replied Emily, returning to her work. "She said it was the only thing I could do right." Michael was quiet for a moment, then went to an old chest in the corner of the room and came back with a pile of torn clothes, patched up haphazardly. "Can you fix these?" Emily examined the items. There were many, some needing simple patches, others requiring more extensive adjustments, but it was work she could do, sitting down, without relying on her bad leg. "I can," she assured him. In the following days, Emily worked on the clothes. Every piece she finished, Michael examined carefully and nodded in approval. A week later, he returned with more clothes, but this time they weren't his. "The folks down in the village want to know if you'll do work for them," he explained. "They'll pay." Emily was surprised. She hadn't expected her work to be good enough for others to pay for it. Michael explained that he went down to the village once a month to sell produce from the garden and buy what they needed, and someone had noticed the well-sewn clothes he was wearing. "But does that mean I'll have money?" asked Emily, still processing. "You will. Half goes to you, half is mine for room and board. Fair?" It was more than fair. It was more than she had ever imagined. Emily quickly agreed and started working on the orders. The work was tiring, but rewarding. For the first time in her life, she felt she was producing something of value. A routine settled in the mountains. Michael tended the land and animals. Emily took care of the house and sewed. They spoke little, but each other's presence was comfortable. They didn't need to fill the silence with empty words. 3 months after arriving in the mountains, Emily was sewing on the porch when she saw a figure coming up the trail. Her heart raced when she recognized Amber, her sister. The girl arrived breathless, more from being unaccustomed to hiking than from the difficulty of the path. "Emily!" she shouted from afar. "Emily, you need to come back!" Emily set aside her sewing and grabbed her crutches, standing up. Michael came out of the garden with a hoe in hand, alert. "What are you doing here?" asked Emily, trying to keep her voice steady. Amber stepped onto the porch, tossed her hair back, and let out a dramatic sigh. "Mom and Dad sent me to get you. There's a merchant from Springfield offering $200 a month for a maid, but he wants to meet you first. He said if you know how to sew, he'll pay up to $300. The information hit like a bomb. Emily felt her stomach churn. Of course, the family didn't miss her. They wanted to sell her again, this time for a higher price. "I'm not going," said Emily, but her voice came out weak. "What do you mean you're not going?" Amber retorted impatiently. "You're their daughter, you have to obey. Besides, you're not making much here, are you? There you'll earn a lot more." Michael stepped onto the porch, standing beside Emily. He said nothing, just crossed his arms and stared at Amber. "She's not coming back," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We have a contract. I paid for her work for a year." "Contract?" Amber laughed mockingly. "That little piece of paper? My dad can tear that up whenever he wants. Besides, you paid for her to work, not to own her." "I'm not our family's property either," Emily finally found her voice, "and I'm not going back to be sold again." Amber narrowed her eyes, surprised by her sister's response. Emily had never spoken like that before, never stood up for herself. "Fine," the girl said, shrugging, "but I'm going to tell Dad you refused. He won't like it. And you," she pointed at Michael, "will have trouble if you don't give her back." "I'm not giving anyone back," Michael replied. "And if your father wants to talk, he knows where to find me." Amber stomped down the trail, clearly angry. Emily watched until her sister disappeared among the trees. Her hands were shaking. She knew this wasn't over. Her father would come back, maybe with others, and she was afraid of what might happen. "I'm sorry," she said to Michael. "I didn't want to cause trouble for you." "You didn't," he answered, returning to the garden as if nothing had happened. But Emily couldn't get back to work. She spent the rest of the day restless, watching the trail, expecting the family to appear at any moment. That night, she could barely eat. Michael noticed but didn't comment. For the next 3 days, Emily lived in a state of constant tension. Every unusual noise made her heart race. Michael continued his normal routine, but she could tell he was also more alert, looking toward the trail more often. On the evening of the 3rd day, Emily made a decision. She wasn't going to stay and cause problems for Michael. He had been too good to her to deserve trouble from a greedy family. She waited for Michael to fall asleep on the living room sofa, gathered her few belongings, and slipped out the back door toward the trail leading down to the village. The darkness was almost complete. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and Emily had to use one of her crutches to feel the path ahead. Each step was difficult, but she pressed on. She had to leave before her father arrived. She was halfway down the descent when the crutch slipped on a wet rock. Emily tried to catch her balance, but it was too late. She fell sideways, feeling a sharp pain in the ankle of her good leg. She cried out more from surprise than pain, but the sound echoed through the silent mountains. She tried to get up, but the pain was unbearable. Her ankle began to swell rapidly. Emily dragged herself to a tree and leaned against it, trying to control her breathing. She had been a fool. Now she was hurt, alone in the dark, unable to walk. The hours passed slowly. Emily tried calling for help a few times, but her voice was lost in the vastness of the mountains. The night's chill set in, and she pulled the blanket she had brought tighter around herself. She thought of Michael waking up and finding the house empty. Would he look for her, or would he be relieved to be free of the problem she represented? Dawn arrived slowly, painting the sky with shades of orange. Emily was nearly asleep from exhaustion when she heard hurried footsteps on the trail. She lifted her head and saw Michael running down, his face etched with worry. "Emily!" he shouted when he saw her. "I'm sorry," she began to cry. "I just wanted to leave before I caused you more trouble." Michael knelt beside her and examined her swollen ankle. He said nothing about her running away, asked no questions. He simply picked her up carefully in his arms and began climbing the trail back to the house. Emily couldn't control her tears, not because of the pain in her ankle, but because this man, who barely knew her, was carrying her up the mountain without a single word of reproach. How long had it been since someone had taken care of her like that? Back at the house, Michael prepared a compress with herbs he grew in his garden. He wrapped Emily's ankle gently, then brought a bitter tea he said would help with the pain. She drank it without complaint. "You don't have to run away," Michael finally said, sitting in the chair next to the bed where Emily was lying. "If you want to leave, you can go. But you don't have to run off in the middle of the night and get hurt." "I don't want to leave," Emily admitted, her voice weak. "But I don't want my father to come here and cause trouble because of me. You don't deserve that." Michael was quiet for a long moment, looking at his own hands. Then, slowly, he removed the work glove from his left hand. Emily saw that 2 fingers were shorter than normal, deformed from birth. "When I was 18, my father took me to the city to meet a girl," Michael began, his voice low. "Her family were good people, religious. Everything was set for the marriage. But when the girl saw my hand, she made a face of disgust and told her father she wouldn't marry a cripple." Emily held her breath, processing the revelation. "The news spread through the city," he continued. "Soon everyone knew I had been rejected. People started looking at me differently, making comments. My father was ashamed. My mother tried to arrange other marriages, but no one was interested. So I came here to the high mountains where no one would judge me for my hand. He put the glove back on, covering the deformed fingers. "When I saw you in that town square, being humiliated by your own family because of your leg, I saw myself 15 years ago. No one deserves to be treated as worthless just because of something they can't change." Tears streamed down Emily's face. She finally understood. Michael hadn't bought a maid. He had saved someone who understood exactly what it was like to be judged and rejected for something beyond their control. "Thank you," was all she could say. Michael nodded, stood up, and left the room, letting Emily process everything she had just discovered. For the first time since arriving in the mountains, she felt she truly belonged there. Not because she was a maid, but because someone had seen value where everyone else saw a flaw. The following days were a time of forced recovery. Emily couldn't put weight on her foot, so she was confined to the bed and the chair beside it. Michael improvised a support for her to keep her leg elevated while she sewed, and she continued working on the orders that had come in. During this period, they talked more than they had in all the previous months. Michael told her how he had built the house himself, stone by stone, wood by wood, how he had started the garden from scratch, learning through trial and error, how the goats were the first investment he made with the money he saved from selling vegetables in the village. Emily spoke about her childhood, about the grandmother who had been the only person to treat her with affection, about how the illness in her leg had changed everything, turning her from a normal child into a burden for the family, about the dreams she had to abandon because no one believed she could achieve them. "I wanted to be a teacher," she admitted one day while sewing a dress a woman from the village had ordered. "I always liked studying, but my mother said no school would want a lame teacher, that the children would make fun of me." "Your mother was wrong," Michael said bluntly. "Was she?" "She was. I've known teachers with all kinds of limitations. There's one in the village who's blind in one eye, another who uses a cane. What matters is whether the person can teach, not whether they walk properly." The simple observation affected Emily more than she expected. She spent the rest of the day thinking about it, imagining how her life might have been if someone had said those words to her years ago. 2 weeks after the fall, Emily's ankle had finally improved enough for her to move around the house again. It still hurt a bit, but she could walk with the crutches without feeling like she would faint from pain. It was on a Thursday morning that 3 men appeared coming up the trail. Emily saw them through the window and recognized her father immediately. With him were 2 neighbors from the old street where the family lived, big men used to heavy work. "Michael," she called, her voice tense. "My father's coming, and he's not alone." Michael was in the yard, fixing a part of the fence the goats had damaged. He dropped the tools, wiped his hands on his pants, and walked calmly to the front of the house. Emily came out onto the porch, leaning on her crutches, her heart pounding. Frank arrived breathing heavily, more from anger than from the exertion of the climb. The 2 men accompanying him stayed a step behind, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "I've come to get my daughter," Frank announced, pointing at Emily. "You have no right to keep her." "Yes, I do," Michael replied, keeping his voice calm. "We have a contract signed by you. She works for me for a year. There are still 8 months left." "That contract is worthless," Frank spat on the ground. "She's my daughter, and she's coming with me now." "I'm not going," Emily said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I want to stay here." Frank turned to her with a furious expression. "You have no choice. I found you a better job with a merchant who pays 3 times more. You're going, and I won't hear any excuses." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. "She's not going," Michael repeated, stepping forward. "And if you try to take her by force, you'll have a problem." The 2 neighbors who had come with Frank exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of them, a grey-haired man named Harold, cleared his throat. "Frank, maybe it's best we leave," he suggested. "The girl's grown up if she wants to stay." "Shut up," Frank cut in. "You're here to help me, not to give opinions." "I came because you said your daughter was being kept here against her will," Harold replied, clearly bothered. "But it seems she wants to stay. I won't help you drag the young lady away by force." The other neighbor, younger, nodded in agreement. "Yeah, Frank, this isn't right." Frank looked at the 2 men angrily, then turned back to Michael and Emily. His face was red with fury and humiliation at being contradicted in front of witnesses. "You seduced my daughter," he accused, pointing his finger at Michael. "Filled her head with lies so she'd stay here doing who knows what." "Dad!" Emily felt her face burn. "Nobody seduced me. I work and sleep in the bedroom. Michael sleeps in the living room. There's nothing wrong." "That's what you say," Frank continued. "But everyone in town will know my daughter is living alone with a man out in the middle of nowhere. Your reputation was already bad. Now it'll get even worse." Michael clenched his fists but kept his composure. "You should have thought about your daughter's reputation before trying to sell her in the town square like she was cattle," he said, each word loaded with restraint. "Now get off my property." Frank took a threatening step toward Michael, but Harold grabbed his arm. "Let's go, Frank. You're wrong about this, and everyone knows it. Leave the young lady alone." "This isn't over," Frank shouted, shaking his arm to break free. "I'll go to town and tell everyone how you two are living here. Let's see if anyone will still do business with you." The three men went down the trail, Frank cursing the whole time while the neighbors tried to calm him down. Emily collapsed into the porch chair, trembling. Michael remained standing, watching until the men disappeared from view. "He's really going to do it," said Emily, her voice faltering. "He'll spread rumors through town, and you'll lose customers. You'll lose money because of me." Michael turned to her, his face still serious. "Let him say whatever he wants. We know the truth." "But the people in the village, they'll believe him. They'll stop buying your vegetables, they'll stop bringing sewing to me. We'll end up with nothing. Then we'll figure something out. It's not the first time I've had to start over." Michael's calmness was both comforting and frustrating. Emily wanted him to get angry, to shout, to blame her. But he simply went back to working on the fence as if nothing major had happened. The rumors spread quickly. The following week, when Michael went down to the village to sell his vegetables, he came back with half the produce. People had refused to buy, looking at him with disapproval. An elderly lady who always bought tomatoes turned her face away. The owner of the convenience store, who used to place large orders, said he didn't need anything anymore. "Mr. Frank has been talking a lot around here," the man explained, unable to look Michael in the eye. "Said his daughter is living with you in an improper way. You know how it is, right? People have to think about the community's morals." Michael didn't argue. He gathered the remaining products and returned home. Emily was waiting on the porch, and from his expression she could tell things hadn't gone well. "Didn't you sell anything?" she asked. "I sold a little, enough. But it wasn't enough." Emily knew that, and the sewing orders had stopped coming too. The women who used to bring clothes for mending now avoided any contact. That night, Emily could barely sleep. Guilt consumed her. Michael had opened his doors to her, treated her with dignity, and now he was paying the price. There had to be a solution, something that would make the rumors stop. The next day, Emily was tidying the house when she heard footsteps on the porch. She expected more trouble, but when she opened the door, she found a man in a black cassock. It was the village priest, Father Robert, a man of about 60, with completely white hair and gentle eyes. "Good morning, my child," he greeted her. "May I speak with you and Mr. Michael?" Emily called Michael, who was in the garden. The three sat at the small kitchen table. Father Robert declined the coffee Emily offered and went straight to the point. "The rumors in the village are getting worse," he began. "I don't need to repeat what they're saying, you already know. I came here to understand the situation with my own eyes, before making any judgment." Michael kept a neutral face, but Emily felt exposed, as if she were being evaluated and judged. "Emily, are you here of your own free will?" the priest asked, looking directly at her. "Yes, Father," she replied firmly. "I work here. Michael gives me a place to stay, food and payment, nothing more." "And you, Michael, what is the nature of your relationship?" "She's my employee," Michael answered. "I have a signed contract, everything within the law." Father Robert studied them for a long moment. Emily had the impression that the clergyman could see far beyond what was being said. Finally, he sighed and clasped his hands on the table. "I believe you," he said. "I've known both of you long enough. Michael, I know you're an honorable man. Emily, I spoke with your high school teacher, and he had nothing but praise for your character. But you need to understand that it's not about what I believe." "What do you mean?" Emily asked. "The community lives on reputation and appearances. Right or wrong, that's how it is. And right now, both of your reputations are tarnished. This will affect your lives, your businesses, everything." "So what do you think we should do?" Michael asked, a hint of impatience in his voice. "There are two options," the priest said calmly. "The first is for Emily to return to her family and for you to end this work arrangement. That would make the rumors die down." "No," Emily said immediately. "I'm not going back there. Not after what they did." "Then the second option remains," Father Robert continued. "You make the union official. A simple but legal marriage that removes any doubt about the propriety of the situation. That way, Emily would be here as a wife, not as an employee, and the rumors would lose their strength." The silence that followed was heavy. Emily felt her face grow warm. Marriage? To Michael? They barely knew each other. He had been kind, yes, but that didn't mean he wanted to marry her. "I understand it's a difficult decision," the priest said, "and it's not something that needs to be decided right now, but think it over. You have a week. After that, I'll need to take an official stance on the situation, and that could bring more complications." Father Robert stood up, blessed them both, and left, leaving them in an awkward silence. Emily couldn't look at Michael for the rest of the day. He also seemed to avoid eye contact, focusing intensely on his work in the garden. They ate dinner in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. That night, lying in bed, Emily analyzed the situation from every angle. Marriage. The words spun in her head without stopping. She had never thought about getting married. Who would want to marry a cripple? Her own family had always made it clear she was a burden, not a desirable wife. But Michael was different. He had seen value in her when no one else did. He treated her with respect. He didn't make absurd demands. Would a marriage with him be so bad? Or would it just be trading one kind of prison for another? And him? What did Michael think of all this? Did the idea of marrying her disgust him? Or was he considering the priest's proposal as a practical solution to a problem? The days passed slowly. Michael and Emily maintained a polite distance from each other, each waiting for the other to bring up the subject, but neither had the courage. It was only on the fifth night, when there were 2 days left until the priest's deadline, that Michael finally spoke. They were sitting on the porch, looking at the stars that seemed brighter up in the mountains. "I've been thinking about what the priest said," he began, his voice low, "and I think I have a solution that doesn't involve marriage." Emily felt a tightness in her chest. She didn't know if it was relief or disappointment. "What?" she asked. "You can keep living here, but as a partner, not as an employee. We formalize a business. You take care of the sewing part, I take care of the garden. We split the profits. With a partnership contract, everything is legal, and the priest can't complain." It was a smart solution, practical, typical of Michael. Emily should be satisfied with the proposal. It was better than going back to her family, and better than forcing a marriage that neither of them wanted. So why did she feel like crying? "All right," she agreed, trying to keep her voice steady. "It seems like a good idea. Tomorrow I'll go down to the village and talk to the notary. We'll get the papers done properly." "Okay." Silence fell between them again. Michael stood up after a few minutes, wished her good night, and went inside. Emily stayed on the porch, looking at the starry sky, trying to understand the emptiness she felt in her chest. That night, lying in bed, Emily finally admitted to herself what she had been trying to ignore for weeks. She had developed feelings for Michael. It wasn't just gratitude or respect. It was something deeper, the way her heart raced when he entered the room, the way she paid attention to every word he said, how she slept better knowing he was there, even if in another room. But he only saw her as an employee, or at most, a partner, someone who needed to be protected from rumors, but not someone he actually wanted to share his life with. Emily cried into her pillow, trying to muffle the sounds so Michael wouldn't hear, crying for everything she never had, and probably never would, crying for the life that could have been different if she had been born without the defective leg, crying because she had finally found someone who saw her as a person, but couldn't love her as a woman. In the next room, separated only by a thin wall, Michael was also awake. He stared at the ceiling, replaying the conversation on the porch. He had proposed the partnership because it seemed like the right thing to do, the solution that respected both of them. That didn't force anything. But a part of him, a part he had been trying to silence for months, wanted to have proposed something different. He wanted to have asked if she would consider marriage, not because of the rumors, but because in the last few months, the house that was once silent and lonely had become a home. Emily had brought life to that place, not just with work, but with her presence. The way she hummed softly while sewing, how she always made strong coffee in the morning, just the way he liked it. The times she smiled when she thought he wasn't looking. Michael had spent 15 years alone in the mountains, convinced it was better that way, that no one would want to be with someone like him. But Emily had changed that. She didn't care about the deformed hand. In fact, she didn't even seem to notice. But she was young, with her whole life ahead of her. What would a 22-year-old woman want with a man 15 years older, living isolated on a mountain? She deserved more. She deserved someone who could give her a better life in the city, with opportunities he could never offer. The partnership proposal was the right thing. It was the way to protect her without trapping her in a marriage she didn't want. Michael repeated this to himself several times, trying to convince himself before finally falling asleep. The next morning, Michael woke up early as always and went to tend the garden. Emily made coffee and stayed in the kitchen, lost in thought. When he came in for coffee, she gathered the courage to speak. "Michael," she began, but her voice came out weak. She cleared her throat and tried again. "About what you said yesterday. The partnership." "Yes?" He stopped with the cup halfway to his mouth. "I don't think it's a good idea." Michael set the cup down slowly, his face turning serious. "Why? I thought it would solve the problem." "It solves the problem of the rumors, but—" Emily stopped, searching for the right words. "It doesn't solve what I'm feeling." The silence that followed was tense. Michael looked at her with an expression Emily couldn't decipher. "And what are you feeling?" he asked, his voice careful. Emily took a deep breath. She was going to tell the truth, even if it meant being rejected once again. At least she would be honest. "I've grown attached to you," she admitted, the words tumbling out. "I don't want to be just your partner. I don't want to sleep in separate rooms for the rest of my life, pretending we're just co-workers. And if you don't feel the same, it's okay, I understand. I can leave, find another place." But I needed to tell the truth. Michael stood still, processing the words. Emily waited, her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Do you want to leave?" he finally asked. "No. But I will if you want me to." "I don't want you to leave," Michael said, his voice growing firmer. "And I've grown attached to you too. I proposed the partnership because I thought you wouldn't want, that no one would want to be with someone like me." Emily felt tears burning in her eyes. "What do you mean, someone like you? You're the best person I've ever known in my life. I'm 15 years older than you. I live isolated on this mountain. I have this hand. And you're young, beautiful, you have your whole life ahead of you. I didn't think you'd want to be stuck here with me." "I don't feel stuck," Emily said, moving closer to him. "For the first time in my life, I feel free. Free to be myself. Free to work at what I love. Free to be with someone who respects me." Michael finally allowed himself to smile, a small but genuine smile. "So we forget the partnership idea." "Forget it," Emily agreed, "and accept the priest's suggestion." Michael extended his left hand, the one with the deformed fingers, and Emily took it without hesitation. He pulled her closer, and for the first time they embraced. It wasn't a romantic or passionate hug. It was a hug of mutual understanding, of two people who had found in each other what was always missing in the world. The following Sunday, Father Robert returned to the house in the mountains, expecting to hear their decision. He was surprised when both asked him to perform the marriage right there without delay. "Are you sure?" he asked, clearly pleased but wanting to make sure there was no coercion. "It's a serious decision." "We are," they both answered at the same time. The ceremony was simple. It took place in the small living room of the house with the priest as the only witness. There were no flowers, elaborate rings, or party. Just two people making sincere vows to care for each other, to respect and support in good days and bad. When the priest declared them husband and wife, Michael kissed Emily on the forehead, a gentle and respectful gesture that made her heart race. Father Robert blessed them and went down the mountain with a smile on his face, satisfied that he had managed to resolve the situation in a way that benefited everyone. The months that followed were transformative. Michael and Emily shared the room but maintained the work dynamic that already worked. He took care of the land, she took care of the house and sewing. But now there was something more, a true partnership based on growing affection and mutual respect. The news of the marriage spread through the village. The rumors died down, although some people still looked with suspicion. But gradually the customers returned. The women brought sewing for Emily. The buyers came back for Michael's vegetables. The business grew. Emily had a knack for numbers and began organizing the couple's finances. Michael, who had always sold the products at low prices because he didn't know how to calculate properly, found he could charge more fairly and still have satisfied customers. They bought better fabrics, and Emily began making not only men's but complete custom clothes. Her pieces became known in the region for the quality of work and attention to detail. Michael expanded the garden and started raising more animals, but not everything was easy. 3 months after the marriage, Amber showed up at the house again, this time alone with a different expression on her face. "Emily," she called, standing at the start of the porch. "Can I talk to you?" Emily was sewing and almost dropped everything when she saw her sister. Michael, who was in the garden, walked near the house but kept his distance, making it clear he was there if needed. "What do you want, Amber?" Emily asked without getting up. "I came to apologize," said her sister, the words coming out with difficulty. "For what we did. For everything." Emily set the sewing aside and really looked at her sister. Amber seemed thinner, more tired. She didn't have the same arrogant posture as before. "Why are you apologizing now?" Emily asked, suspicious. "After months?" Amber sighed and sat on the edge of the porch, keeping her distance. "Because things at home got horrible after you left. Dad keeps drinking, spending the leftover money. Mom just complains. And I realized you were the only one who made that house work. Me. But you always said I was a burden, that I was good for nothing." "And we were wrong," Amber admitted, looking at her own hands. "You cooked, cleaned, kept everything organized. And now that you're not there anymore, the house has become chaos. No one wants to do anything. Dad and Mum fight all the time. And I had to start working in other people's houses to help, and it's awful. The employers treat us very badly." Emily felt no satisfaction hearing this, only a deep sadness for the family that had never been able to see the value everyone had, including herself. "And what did you come here for? Do you want me to come back? Do you want money?" "No," Amber shook her head. "I just came to apologize. And to say that I envy you. You managed to leave that house and build a life. I'm still stuck there." "You can leave," Emily said, her voice firm, but not cruel. "You're 17 now. You can get a job. You can study. You don't have to be stuck." "It's not that easy." "I know, but it's not impossible either. I managed." Amber looked at her sister with a mix of admiration and sadness. "Are you really happy here?" she asked. "I am," Emily replied honestly. "Happier than I've ever been." The two remained silent for a few minutes. Finally, Amber stood up. "I should go. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be a better person, and that I regret what we did." Amber went down the trail without looking back. Emily watched until she disappeared, then returned to her sewing. She felt Michael sit beside her, his presence silent but comforting. "Will you forgive your family?" he asked. "I don't know," Emily admitted. "Maybe one day. But right now I just want to focus on the life we're building here." Michael nodded, respecting her decision. They returned to work, each at their own pace, but always together. 2 months later, it was Nancy's turn to appear. Emily's mother arrived at noon, wearing an old dress and carrying a bag. She seemed to have aged years in the few months since Emily had last seen her. "Emily?" she called from the bottom of the porch, not coming up. "Can I talk to you?" Emily was preparing lunch. Michael was in the valley negotiating the sale of some goats, so she was alone. Part of her wanted to send her mother away. Another part, smaller but persistent, wanted to hear what she had to say. "Come up," she finally said. Nancy climbed up slowly, looking around the house and property. Emily could see the surprise on her face as she noticed how well kept everything was. "You've fixed everything up so nicely," Nancy commented, almost in a whisper. "What do you want, Mom?" Emily asked without beating around the bush. Nancy placed the bag on the table. Inside were some jars of food, cornbread, dulce de leche, homemade bread. "I brought these for you," she said, "and I came to apologize." Emily crossed her arms, waiting. Nancy continued, her voice trembling. "I was a terrible mother to you. I let your father treat you badly. I let Amber make jokes. I didn't defend you when I should have. And on top of that, I let them sell you in the town square as if you were an animal. I don't deserve forgiveness for that." "Why?" Emily asked, her voice cold. "Why did you never protect me?" Nancy sat down, her legs seeming to weaken. She brought her hands to her face, and Emily realized she was crying. "Because I was afraid," her mother admitted. "Afraid of your father, afraid of not having money, afraid of being alone. And it's easier to blame someone for problems than to take responsibility. You became the scapegoat for everything that went wrong in our lives. If we didn't have to take care of you, we'd have more money. If you weren't lame, we could marry you off well and get a dowry. It was all lies we made up to avoid facing that our problems were our own fault." The raw honesty of the words surprised Emily. It was the first time her mother had admitted any kind of responsibility. "And now what do you want? For me to forgive and forget everything?" "No," Nancy shook her head. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just came to say that I was wrong, that you deserved better parents, and that," her voice faltered, "and that I regret every day not being the mother you needed." Emily felt her own tears burning, but didn't let them fall. She had cried too much over this family. She wouldn't cry anymore. "Thank you for coming," she said formally, "but I need you to understand one thing. I have a life now, a good life, and I won't let you destroy it." "I know," Nancy stood up, "and I didn't come to ask for anything. I just came to tell the truth. You're a strong girl, Emily, you always were. You managed to build something I never had the courage to build, a real life, based on respect and not on fear." Nancy left without looking back, leaving the bag with the food on the table. Emily stood still for a long time, processing the conversation. When Michael returned hours later, she told him everything. He listened in silence, then hugged her. "You don't have to forgive them if you don't want to," he said. "But you also don't have to carry the anger forever. How you decide what's best for you." Emily nodded, grateful to have someone who understood her so well. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The months turned into seasons. Winter arrived with force in the mountains, bringing intense cold and some light snowfalls. Michael taught Emily how to prepare the house for the cold, store food, and care for the animals when the temperature dropped too low. During that winter, stuck indoors because of the weather, Michael and Emily learned even more about each other. He told childhood stories of growing up as the only child of hard-working farmers who had little, how the deformity in his hand made him rejected not only in relationships, but also in employment, forcing him to learn everything on his own. Emily shared memories she had buried deep, from a time before the illness, when she was a normal child who played and ran, how the high fever at age 7 left lasting effects on her leg, and how her family never had money for proper treatment. How gradually she stopped being Emily, the daughter, and became Emily, the problem. One night, while snow fell outside and the fire crackled in the fireplace, Michael took Emily's hand and pulled her close. "You know what I think when I look at you?" he asked. "What?" "I think how lucky I was to be in that town square that day, to have seen you before someone else took you, because my life was empty before you came here." Emily felt her heart race. They had married out of necessity, but somewhere along the months it had transformed into something real. "Mine was empty too," she admitted. "I just existed. I wasn't living. You taught me the difference." Michael kissed her, and this time it wasn't on the forehead. It was a real kiss, full of meaning and unspoken promises. When they parted, Emily was smiling, and Michael was too. That night, for the first time, they truly slept as husband and wife, not out of obligation or convention, but because they wanted to, because they had built something real based on respect and genuine affection. Spring arrived, bringing renewal. The garden exploded with color and life. The animals had babies, and Michael and Emily's business continued growing. They had become known in the region not only for the quality of their products, but for their inspiring story. It was during spring that a lady of about 65 years appeared at the house. She introduced herself as Mrs. Thompson, a retired former teacher who lived in the village and had heard about Emily. "I came here because I have a proposal," she said, sitting on the porch after accepting a glass of lemonade. "I heard you always wanted to be a teacher." Emily was surprised. How did this lady know that? "I spoke with Father Robert," explained Mrs. Thompson, as if reading the question on Emily's face, "and he told me a bit of your story. Not the details, just enough for me to know you're someone special." "I don't know if I'm special," Emily replied, embarrassed. "You are. And I need help at the school. I'm getting old. My back can't handle standing all day anymore. I was thinking of retiring for good, but the school only has 2 teachers. If I leave, the children will have no classes, so I came to offer you a job." "A job as a teacher?" Emily nearly fell off her chair. "But I have no qualifications. I only finished high school." "I know, but you can be my assistant. I'll still teach, but you help with tasks, corrections, and the children who struggle more. And meanwhile, I'll teach you. You study at home, take tests, and when you're old enough, you can take the entrance exam for education. There's a university in Chicago that accepts older students." Emily looked at Michael, who was listening from the kitchen door. He smiled and nodded, encouraging her. I don't know what to say," Emily stammered. "Say yes," Mrs. Thompson smiled. "The children will love you, and you'll love teaching. It's different from sewing. It's shaping futures." Emily accepted. She started working at the school twice a week, going down the mountain in the morning and returning in the afternoon. It was tiring but rewarding. The children really loved her. They didn't make jokes about her leg. When they asked, she explained honestly, and they accepted it as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Mrs. Thompson became a mentor and friend. She lent books for Emily to study, taught teaching methods, shared decades of experience, and most importantly, she believed in Emily in a way no one ever had. "You have a natural gift," Mrs. Thompson said one day. "The children trust you. That's not something you teach, it's something you have." Michael fully supported Emily's new endeavor. He took on more household chores on the days she went down to the village and continued expanding the vegetable garden and the produce business. Money started coming in better, and they managed to make improvements to the house, a larger bedroom, a new bathroom, an expanded porch. 1 year after the wedding, in the same week they would celebrate their anniversary, Michael prepared a surprise. When Emily returned from school that day, she found the house decorated with flowers from the garden. There was a table set with special food and, in the center, a small cake he had tried to make. "What is this?" Emily asked, moved. "Our wedding anniversary," Michael said a bit awkwardly. "I know it wasn't the wedding you dreamed of in the church with everyone watching, but I wanted to mark the day in a special way." Emily dropped her crutches and threw herself into his arms, crying with happiness. They weren't tears of sadness, but of gratitude for having found someone so thoughtful. "It was the best wedding I could have had," she said, "because it was with you." They ate dinner slowly, talking about everything that had happened over the past year, the changes, the challenges, the victories. When they finished, Michael held Emily's hand and took a deep breath, as if about to say something important. "I love you," he said, the words coming out simply but filled with sincerity. "It took me a while to realize it, but it's true. You're not just my wife. You're the person who gives my life meaning." Emily smiled, tears flowing freely now. "I love you too," she replied. "I think I always have, since the day you didn't yell at me when I spilled the water, since the day you lowered the clothesline, since all the small gestures that showed you saw me as a person, not as a defect." They kissed, and for the first time, both fully understood what they had. It wasn't a marriage of convenience or a practical solution to a problem. It was true love, built stone by stone, day after day, through respect, understanding, and mutual acceptance. But life is never perfectly calm. A few weeks after the celebration, Emily was at school when an unknown man appeared looking for her. He was well dressed, in his early 40s, and introduced himself as Vincent, the merchant Frank had mentioned a year earlier. "I came to speak with you about a job proposal," he said without preamble. "I'm not interested," Emily replied immediately. "You haven't even heard it yet," Vincent smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I have a large store in Springfield. I sell fine, imported fabrics. I need someone who knows how to sew well, to make custom pieces for my catalog. I pay $500 a month, plus commission per piece sold. It could easily reach $1,000. It was a lot of money, more than Emily earned from sewing and her work at the school combined. But there was something about the man's manner that made her uncomfortable. "Thank you for the offer, but I decline," she said firmly. "Because of your husband?" Vincent asked. "He won't let you work outside?" "That's not it. He supports me in everything. I just don't want to work for you." Vincent's expression changed, becoming less friendly. "You know, your father owes me money," he revealed. "A lot of money. I lent it to him with the promise that he'd get you to work for me. Now he can't pay. So I'm offering it directly to you. Work for me and your father's debt disappears. Don't work, and I'll collect in other ways." The veiled threat didn't go unnoticed. Emily felt a wave of anger. "My father's problems aren't my responsibility. He sold me, remember? So any debt he has with you is his problem." "All right." Vincent raised his hands in false surrender. "But I'll give you a warning. Your father's already been saying around town that you and your husband owe him money, that you bought the land with his money, that you're not paying it back. Rumors like that can really harm a small business like yours." With that, he left, leaving Emily furious and worried. She went home early that day and told everything to Michael. "He's trying to threaten you," Michael said, clearly irritated. "But we won't give in. We don't owe your father anything, and we'll make that clear if necessary. But what if he really spreads rumors? It took us so long to build a good reputation in the village. Then we'll have to fight to keep it, but the right way, with the truth." Michael went down to the village the next day and went straight to talk to Father Robert. He explained the situation and asked the clergyman to help clarify any rumors that might come up. The priest agreed and said he'd speak with key people in the community. But Frank really started spreading lies. He said he'd financed the house in the mountains, that Michael and Emily were in debt, that they'd stolen money from him. Some people believed it. Others, who knew Michael's character, doubted it. The situation reached a critical point when Vincent showed up in the mountains one night. He was accompanied by two large men, clearly henchmen. Michael was in the garden when they arrived, and Emily was alone in the house. "I came to get what's mine," said Vincent, stepping onto the porch uninvited. "Your father didn't pay, so you'll work for me until the debt is settled. And I won't take no for an answer this time." "Get off my property," Emily said, trying to keep her voice steady despite her fear. "Now." One of the henchmen took a step forward, but before he could do anything, Michael appeared. He was holding a sickle he used for work, not as a threat, but as a clear warning that he would defend his property. "You heard her," Michael said, his voice dangerously calm. "Leave. Now." Vincent assessed the situation. Even though it was 3 against 1, Michael had the advantage of defending his home and family, and the merchant wasn't stupid enough to risk a fight that could end badly for all sides. "This isn't over," said Vincent, stepping off the porch. "I'll get my money one way or another." "Then collect from who owes it, Frank," Michael replied, "and don't come back here." The 3 men went down the trail, but the threat still hung in the air. Michael locked all the doors and windows that night, and he and Emily barely slept, alert to any strange noise. The next day, they went to the village and spoke with Mrs. Thompson, who had a lot of influence in the community. They explained the whole situation, from the sale in the town square to the recent threats. The teacher listened to everything carefully, her face growing more and more serious. "This needs to stop," she said, "and I know exactly how." Mrs. Thompson gathered a group of respected women from the village, shopkeepers, mothers, the church secretary. Together they went to Vincent's shop in Springfield. They didn't go alone. They brought their husbands and children. When they arrived, Mrs. Thompson entered the store and spoke loudly enough for all the customers to hear. "Vincent, I've come to let you know that no woman from our village will buy fabric from you anymore, and will spread to the other nearby settlements the kind of man you are, someone who threatens innocent women and tries to collect debts that aren't theirs." Vincent turned red with anger and humiliation. "You can't do that." "Yes, I can," she replied calmly. "And I will, unless you leave Emily and Michael alone and stop accepting bets and loans from Frank. The man is an irresponsible drunk who drags everyone down with him." The customers in the store began to look at Vincent with suspicion. The merchant realized he was losing the battle. His business depended on a good reputation, and if those women really spread that he was involved in threats and extortion, it would seriously harm his sales. "Fine," he conceded, gritting his teeth. "I'll leave them alone. But Frank still owes me." "Then collect from him." "Only from him," Mrs. Thompson said, "and if I find out you've bothered my assistant again, you'll see what a united village can do against a dishonest merchant." The group left the store with their heads held high. When they told Emily and Michael what they had done, both were moved. They weren't alone. They had a community that supported them. "Why did you do this?" Emily asked Mrs. Thompson later. "Because it's the right thing to do," the teacher replied. "And because you and Michael are good people who don't deserve to be harassed because of others' mistakes. Sometimes people need to come together against injustice." Vincent's threat disappeared. He never showed up in the mountains or tried to make contact again. And Frank, realizing he had lost whatever influence he thought he had over his daughter, also stopped spreading rumors, especially after Father Robert had a serious talk with him about responsibility and consequences. Life returned to normal, or rather, it continued evolving into something even better. Emily was accepted into a special teacher training program that ran on Saturdays in Chicago. Michael adjusted his routine to take her by cart to the bus stop every week. Mrs. Thompson, seeing Emily's commitment, began giving her more responsibilities at the school. Gradually, Emily went from assistant to substitute teacher. The children adored her. She had patience, creativity, and understood the difficulties each one faced because she had faced many herself. The sewing business also thrived. Emily began making more elaborate clothes, party dresses for the village girls, baptism outfits, even some wedding dresses. Each piece was unique, made with care and attention to detail. The customers were so satisfied that they recommended her to friends and relatives. Michael, in turn, became a regional reference in organic farming. He had learned to grow without pesticides, using natural pest control methods. His products were more expensive, but the quality was unmatched. Restaurants in Springfield began placing regular orders. 2 years after the wedding, on a rainy autumn afternoon, Emily made a discovery that would change everything again. She was pregnant. The news came with a mix of joy and fear. She had always wanted to be a mother, but she was afraid the child might inherit leg problems. Michael, noticing her worry, held her hands and looked into her eyes. "It doesn't matter how our child is born," he said, "with perfect legs or not. We'll love and care for them, and they'll know they have value no matter what." Emily cried, but they were tears of relief. Of course Michael would say that. He more than anyone understood the importance of accepting people as they are. The pregnancy was smooth. Emily continued working at the school until the 7th month, when it became harder to go down the mountains every day. She used the time at home to prepare the baby's room, sewing tiny clothes and making blankets. Mrs. Thompson visited regularly, bringing advice and stories from when she had her own children. The women from the village also stopped by with gifts, cloth diapers, wooden toys made by their husbands, porridge recipes. Even Nancy showed up one day, bringing a crib that had been Emily's when she was a baby. Her mother didn't stay long, but the gesture meant more than words. It was a silent request to be included in the life of her soon-to-arrive granddaughter. "You can come visit when the baby is born," Emily said, surprising herself. "But if you come, you'll have to respect our home and our rules." "I will," Nancy promised. I want the chance to be a better grandmother than I was a mother." It was a start. It wasn't complete forgiveness, but it was a first step. The child was born on a spring morning with the help of an experienced midwife from the village. It was a difficult birth, but Emily was strong. When she finally held the baby in her arms and saw it was a healthy boy, with all his body parts perfect and working, she cried with relief and gratitude. "What will we name him?" Michael asked, holding his son's tiny hand. "Noah," Emily said. "It means heard by God, because all my prayers were heard when I found you." Michael kissed her forehead, too emotional to speak. Noah grew up surrounded by love. He learned to walk on the porch of the house, crawling after the chickens. He learned his first words from his parents, and later at the school where Emily was now the head teacher, taking over from Mrs. Thompson, who had finally retired. Life in the mountains continued, with the natural ups and downs of any family. There were years of bad harvest when the rain didn't come. There were times of illness when Noah caught a high fever and spent days in bed. There were arguments and disagreements because no marriage is perfect. But through it all, Michael and Emily remained partners. They had built something solid, based on mutual respect and deep understanding. It wasn't the kind of love that happens in fairy tales, but it was real and lasting. Frank never recovered from his addictions. He ended up passing away a few years later, his liver destroyed by alcohol. Emily went to the funeral not for him, but out of respect for her own journey. She had learned to let go of the anger and resentment, not because he deserved forgiveness, but because she deserved peace. Amber managed to leave the family home at 18. She got a job at a factory in Chicago and started studying at night. Sometimes she would visit Emily and Michael, bringing small gifts for Noah. The relationship between the sisters was never perfect, but they learned to coexist with respect. Nancy became a present grandmother in Noah's life, not excessively, respecting the boundaries Emily had set, but always showing up for birthdays and special occasions. She never managed to truly apologize, but her actions showed she was trying to make up for past mistakes. Years passed. Noah grew up strong and healthy, a curious boy who loved to learn and help his parents with their work. When he was old enough to understand, Emily told him the whole story, about how she and Michael met, about the challenges they faced, about how love can be built even in the most difficult circumstances. "So, Grandma sold you?" Noah asked, his eyes wide. "She did," Emily confirmed without softening the truth. "But you know what that taught me? That a person's worth isn't determined by others. We choose how much we're worth through our actions and choices." Noah hugged his mother tightly, and Emily realized she was raising a son who would never judge people by their physical limitations. He was growing up in a home where differences were accepted and celebrated. Michael expanded the business to include a small production of jams and preserves. Emily, in addition to teaching, began giving sewing workshops for other women, teaching them how to have their own source of income. The house in the mountains became a landmark, a symbol of overcoming and new beginnings. Mrs. Thompson passed away at 75, sleeping peacefully after a life well lived. At the funeral, Emily cried genuinely. That teacher had believed in her when no one else did, had opened doors that seemed permanently locked. It was impossible to measure the impact she had had. "She loved you like a daughter," Michael said, holding Emily as she cried. "And you honored everything she taught you." Emily decided to create a small fund, in memory of Mrs. Thompson, to help needy young people from the village study. It wasn't a lot of money, but it was enough to pay for school materials and transportation. It was a way of giving back what she had received. When Noah turned 10, Emily and Michael celebrated 15 years of marriage. The house was full of friends from the village, school colleagues, customers who had become friends over the years. It was a simple but joyful party, with plenty of food and music played by a local guitarist. "I never imagined my life would be like this," Emily said to Michael as they danced slowly in the backyard under the stars. "That I would be happy, fulfilled, loved. And I never imagined I would find someone who would turn this lonely mountain into a home full of life, Michael replied. We built something good together. We did, Emily agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. They kept dancing, two survivors of their own battles who had found refuge in each other. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been pain, rejection, struggle, but it was worth every moment. Emily looked around, seeing Noah laughing with his friends, seeing the house they had built brick by brick, seeing the life they had created from rejection and suffering. And she understood something fundamental. Sometimes being discarded by those who should value you is the greatest blessing in disguise, because only when you lose everything can you start building exactly what you need. Michael had seen something in her in that town square that no one else saw. Not pity, not an opportunity for exploitation, but potential. Genuine human value. And by truly seeing her, by treating her with basic dignity, he had planted a seed that blossomed into self-esteem, confidence, and self-respect. Emily was no longer the lame girl who was sold for $50. She was a respected teacher, a talented seamstress, a beloved wife, a dedicated mother. She was complete, not in spite of her limitations, but having learned to live fully with them. And Michael was no longer the lonely man from the mountains, hiding from rejection. He was a present husband, a patient father, an innovative farmer, a pillar of the community. He had learned that his differences did not define him, his actions did. Together, they were living proof that redemption and transformation are possible. That real love isn't what happens at first sight, but what is built day after day through respect, understanding, and mutual commitment. The party continued late into the night, with stories being told and laughter echoing through the mountains. When everyone had left and the family of three retired inside, Emily took one last walk on the porch, now leaning on just one cane. The physical therapy she had started a few years ago had greatly improved her mobility. She looked at the trail that led to the village, the same trail she had climbed for the first time 15 years ago, not knowing what awaited her. She remembered the fear, the uncertainty, the resignation to a fate that seemed inevitable. And then she looked inside the house, where Michael was helping Noah get ready for bed. She heard their laughter, the sound of a happy family. She smiled. That quiet man from the mountains had seen something no one else had. A whole person worthy of love, respect, and all the opportunities life could offer. And by truly seeing her, he not only transformed her life, but his own as well. Emily entered the house, closed the door behind her, and joined her family. There were no more emotional crutches, no more shame or feelings of inadequacy. There was just a woman who had found her place in the world beside someone who valued her for who she was, not for what she couldn't be. And that, she realized, was all she ever needed. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave your sincere words in the comments. Do you think Emily and Michael made the right decisions? We'd love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.